Good morning. I'm saying good morning. I'm just used to saying that because normally my show starts at 11 a.m. and this is my first day doing 2 o'clock, right? So it's the afternoon. So I want to say good afternoon to San Bernardino, Riverside, the Inland Empire, Rancho Cucamonga, and Loma Linda, California. And also good afternoon and good evening to those listening to us on the live stream link. I can't believe I almost said good morning, but this is my first day, as I just said, having the show on in the afternoon at 2 o'clock. This is Kathleen Wells. This is the Kathleen Wells Show. Today is September 5th, and countdown until Election Day is 61 days. Has everyone decided who they're going to vote for on November 6th? I mean, are there still people out there who are trying to figure out who they want to elect for the next 4 years? Is that still a question for some listeners? Yesterday was the first day of the Democratic National Convention, and did you hear that speech by the First Lady, Michelle Obama? I was quite moved by the speech. It resonated with me. However, my listeners know that I've been focusing on mass incarceration. I've been focusing on the drug war. And I'm going to continue to focus on that today. Neither party has officially adopted mass incarceration, the drug war, in their platforms. So the question is, why hasn't either party raised that issue? It's a dramatic issue. It's impacting our society adversely, yet neither party has it officially in their platforms. So the question on the table today is, how can we, the American people, make either party, Democrats or Republicans, shift their focus to mass incarceration, shift their focus to the drug war? Governor of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, said in his speech last night that we are Americans, we shape our own future. So, do we want an America where we're only 5% of the population, yet 25% of the world's incarcerated people? Do we want that for our future? We rank first in the world in locking up our fellow citizens. Number one. We outnumber China and Russia. Do we want an America where by the end of 2005, 1 in every 32 American adults, or rather 7 million people, were incarcerated on probation or on parole, with 2.2 million of them in prison or in jail? And those numbers, those figures were for 2005. That was 7 years ago. So we can imagine, I don't know what the numbers are now. I should have looked, but we can imagine the increase. Astronomical increase, staggering numbers. We now imprison more people for drug law violations solely, just for drug law violations, than what all Western Europe incarcerates for all offenses. Did you hear that? We incarcerate more people solely for drug law violations than what Western Europe incarcerates for all offenses. And yet neither of our parties have the drug mass incarceration in their party platforms. They're not concerned about that at all. That's not an issue. That is not impacting our economy adversely. So I'm delighted to have today as my guest, Chief Judge of the Central District of California, Judge Terry Hatter. Judge Hatter was appointed in 1979 as a United States District Judge for the Central District of California, and in 1998, he became the chief judge of the Central District of California, which is the largest federal district in the nation with approximately 18 million people. So thank you, Judge Hatter, for joining me this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Ms. Wells, but let me correct it. I'm Chief Judge Emeritus now. I've stepped down 2001, followed by three of my female colleagues, and one of them, of those three, is about to step down now, and Judge George King will become the new Chief Judge later this month. And we now, since that resume, we're closer to 20 million people in our district.
More than
94
20 million
federal districts in the United States. It's the largest by far.
Yeah, so this is a significant district.
Oh, yes, it is the largest, more than twice the size of any other in population, and one of the largest in area. And particularly for your listening audience, that includes the Inland Empire, that's our eastern division. And as you perhaps know, San Bernardino County is the largest county in the nation in population. You can put all 6 of the New England states within its confines. It's also, the Inland Empire is one of the fastest growing areas in the nation, with over 4 million people now.
So we're talking about a lot of people, and you've been up close and personal with this drug war. Up close and personal, and seeing it from the position of being on the bench. Yes. So tell me, give me your thoughts about the drug war. How did we actually get here?
Well, let me just preface it by saying that I tried the cases involving the largest amount of cocaine ever found at any one time, and this was back in 1995, I think. 21.5 tons with a street value of $6.9 billion. And you would think that by being able to shut down an operation like that you would be making some encroachment on this so-called war on drugs. Mm-hmm. I do mean so-called. Mm-hmm. We spend more money on enforcement, very little money on prevention, and indeed we do hardly anything to take care of what is a societal problem of more health nature than it is of criminal nature. The criminal part of it is with those who distribute the drugs, and they're the ones who ought to be serving the longest sentences, but that's not the case. Mm-hmm. It's usually the addicts, the individuals who are using small amounts of what's called crack cocaine. Mm-hmm. And until very recently, those using crack cocaine were being penalized at 100 times that of the person with powder cocaine. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to note that you can't have the crack without having the powder. Mm-hmm. So you would think that if there were going to be that kind of a differential, it would be just the opposite, that you want to hit the people with the with the powder, because then you wouldn't have the crack. But we have politicians on both sides of the aisle who have been trying to show the public that they're tough on crime, and they're not very realistic on crime, but they've been very political about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I've discussed this frequently on my show, that this whole drug war started rhetorically with Richard Nixon, but literally with Ronald Reagan with his rhetoric. And so saying with Richard Nixon with his rhetoric, but then Ronald Reagan actually started a literal drug war before crack even hit the streets. In fact, drug crime was on the decline when Ronald Reagan declared the war on drugs.
That's right. If we had just taken more of a page from President Reagan's First Lady, Mrs. Reagan, who often argued for just say no. Of course, it requires more than just saying no, but dealing with the kinds of policies that would encourage young people and others to indeed to stay clear of drugs. I can't help but think about growing up in Chicago and on the south side of Chicago, went to the largest grade school in the nation with over 4,000 kids. We had gangs, we had other kinds of problems of poverty, but we didn't have drugs and we didn't have guns in the community. And now, with those things being brought in, you see what the drug war is supposed to be about. But if it wasn't for those bringing those things in, you don't manufacture the guns in the barrios and the ghettos, and you don't make the drugs there. But it's people on the outside who've made millions and millions of dollars by sending these kinds of things into these often poor inner city communities.
Oh, so you think that drugs have, well, let me ask you, do you think that crack cocaine has been sent specifically or rather targeted into the inner city communities?
Oh, I think what has happened is that all kinds of drugs have been produced into the inner cities, the same way with weapons and all, and the violence that usually is attached to the drug distribution is from all of the weaponry that's now available, too. There's little doubt in my mind that having grown up in a situation where I can still remember only one person being shot in school, and that person's name still rings in my mind, Melvin Miles. Mm-hmm. Shot with a little .22. It was the talk of the entire south side of Chicago. But yet, nowadays, any small child or someone else can get caught in the crossfire between these gangs because they have guns. They only had zip guns in those days. They had knives, perhaps, but certainly not the kind of assault weapons that have been produced by those people who, as I say, make millions off of the manufacture of them.
So this is intentional. You think the intent is intentional? The
intent is to make money, and you're going to put those kinds of things before people to make money. And the crack, of course, as I say, comes from the powder, and it's usually the poorest people who use it, except for some of the celebrities and others who've latched onto it now, because very clearly all of the evidence indicates that the most crack is used in Anglo-populated areas and more affluent areas, and less by African Americans and Latinos. But yet the most severe penalties go to those who are in the barrios and the ghettos. And one reason, of course, is that it's more easily done by the Drug Enforcement Administration and local police enforcing the drug laws in the poorer communities, because often the people are dealing right out on the street, so it doesn't require much ingenuity or anything else on the parts of the police other than just to pick the people up right there.
Well, actually, I've had former police chief of Seattle, Norm Stamper. He's also with the organization LEAP, Law Enforcement Agencies Against Prohibition. I think that's the right acronym. He informed me that blacks and browns, poor communities, are actually targeted for arrest. And we see this going on with the stop and frisk in New York. You know, you have disproportionate amount of black and brown people targeted for arrest.
Well, I think that's certainly true because, again, it's easier to make the arrest there. We had on the books in the federal courts certain laws that gave mandatory minimum sentences for dealing drugs within a certain footage of schools or recreational parks where children might be. And, of course, it's much easier, again, to enforce those laws in the poor communities where there are houses abutting the schools. You don't have the vast school grounds that you might have in a suburban area. And I used to say, while those kinds of laws were attempted to be enforced in my courtroom, that if they really wanted to go, they wouldn't need a yardstick to measure. They could just go into Beverly Hills High School and do some of the other more affluent areas, and the kids are dealing right there in the school. So clearly they have looked at the poor inner cities for most of their enforcement because it's easiest.
Okay, we're going to take a break now, but when we come back, we're going to talk about your own personal experiences on the bench, how witnessing this whole drug war has impacted you personally, and then we'll go into maybe what recipes or prescriptions do you think we should have to sort of remedy this problem? How can we fix it? How can we make it better? So we're going to take a break, and let me give out the call-in number, the toll-free call-in number, so that if any of my listeners have questions for Judge Hatter, they can call in, and that's 1-888-909-1050. So we're going to take a break. I don't hear the music. I usually hear the music when we go into break. So do you hear the music, Judge Hatter?
I do now.
Okay, that sounds good. In fact, I have a new engineer. Today is our first day working together. Her name is Mia, and I think that's fantastic that we have a woman engineer, because that's unusual, isn't it? So, terrific. Mia, thank you very much for bringing on the music. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to hear some personal experiences from Judge Hatter about witnessing the drug war actually from the bench, and his thoughts about that. So we'll come right back, and I'll also take your phone calls on the other side. So we'll be right back. Welcome back. This is the Kathleen Wells Show. I'm Kathleen, and I'm delighted today to have as my guest Judge Terry Hatter. I'm sorry. And, Judge Hatter, what I wanted to ask you is that you touched on the fact that crack cocaine was initially a mandatory minimum sentencing 101 times more than powder cocaine. Just recently, that has now been changed, I think, 18 to 1.
18 to 1.
Exactly. And that's still not satisfactory as far as
and I'm not opposed to there being a differential, but as I try to point out every chance I get, the differential should be the other way. It should be 18 to 1 if there's to be a differential for those who had powder as opposed to those with the crack, because you can't have the crack unless the powder is brought in.
And that makes a lot of sense, and yet our politicians were, and we both are familiar with Michelle Alexander's book,
oh, yes.
The New Jim Crow, Mass
Absolutely.
Incarceration. Our politicians were swayed. They were influenced by all the hype and the twisting of information. How would you characterize it?
Well, I've said for a long time that there are all kinds of misconceptions and the wrong perceptions about what we do to safeguard our communities. And I think the one thing that may change all of this is the sheer cost of it all, where here in California, for example, we spend more on building prisons and maintaining prisons than we spend on higher education. It's clearly the thinking of so many people, because it's simplistic and it's easier to grab onto it, that if you just lock people up, that you safeguard yourself. But that just doesn't happen, because even with the mandatory minimums, some of them are horrendous, 20 years, 40 years. When those people get out, they're going to come back into society ill-equipped, and they're going to commit more crime. Mm-hmm. Instead of providing treatment for those who are addicts at a far lesser cost than we pay to incarcerate them, we spend up to $70,000 to just build a jail cell, and then to maintain a prisoner. And in figures from 5 or 10 years ago, it was $30,000 or $35,000. It's more now. Mm-hmm. And if we use that money for education, if we used it for other preventive kinds of measures, if we had more treatment programs, all of these things are far cheaper and would help safeguard society far better than just locking up people willy-nilly.
But the will isn't there, because we have an entire...
But you're right, but I'm saying that not for the right reasons, but I think that will is going to be there because people are finally going to see how much it costs.
Mm-hmm. But, prisons are profitable. We have this prison industrial complex.
Right. We have the prison guards union that give monies to the Democrats and to the Republicans. And they have far greater sway than the teachers union or other public unions and all.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about your personal experience. People in the system, the lawyers, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, the judges. What is the general feeling they have? What do you feel that the general feeling that people who work the criminal justice system, what is their sense about this whole drug war and mass incarceration?
Well, I think most people I talk to and work with both prosecutorial side, the United States Attorney's Office, the federal public defenders on the other side, private defense lawyers. Many of the prosecutors can't say it publicly, or a few still do, that they don't think that the system makes very much sense. The people who push it the most, of course, the Drug Enforcement Administration, other law enforcement people, although there are some good ones like the Seattle police chief that you mentioned, who will readily admit that this is not something that they need to keep doing in the fashion that they're doing it in order to have more law enforcement officers available. And if you do have more, you want them to be used on crimes of violence and to handle matters that couldn't otherwise be handled. But most people I talk to within the system on both sides really believe, I think almost to a person, that treatment makes much more sense than incarceration. I mean, there are certainly individuals who need to be locked up in prolonged periods of time. And with our prisons and our jails being so overcrowded, we're not keeping some of the people who ought to be kept longer because they're being released together with others. But so many of the people who are in the prisons and in the jails are nonviolent, first-time drug offenders.
With long sentences, and this whole notion that, you know, as Michelle points out in her book, that it has a racial component to it because they're targeting poor black and brown communities, and yet all groups use drugs at the same rate, 13%. And some
some of the groups use at a far greater rate than do African Americans, particularly, and Latinos.
So this is a racial issue, you see.
But still, they're an easy target, and as long as that's true, and as long as the public doesn't understand that they're really better off by having treatment programs that cost far less and really help engage individuals in doing things that are profitable and non-criminal, then we're going to continue with this. The politicians on both sides of the aisle, as I say, are just using the public because the public is ignorant of what really is in their best interest.
What's in their best interest. But isn't there something unconstitutional about this when you're targeting one group over another? Doesn't that violate...
It's hard to say that or to prove that they're targeting one group over another. What they're doing is going into areas where they can enforce more easily, and that tends to be in the poor communities.
But you see the disparate impact, you see. Isn't it a violation?
The impact, yes. There's no doubt about that. When 1 out of every 4 young black males is either in prison or under some kind of supervision of the courts. And for every black male who goes to college, at least 4 go to prison. I mean, it's a terrible situation.
Right, and so what can be done? I mean, it seems to be when you're targeting one group over another, and I mean, Norm Stamper, with the former police chief of Seattle, he will admit that they do target one group over another. When you have statistics that you see regarding stop and frisk in New York City that disproportionately impact black and brown folks, this is intentional. And it seems to me that it would violate the 14th Amendment.
Well, then... those matters have to be brought to court, and you have to look at each case that comes in on its own merits and the facts underlying it.
So, as I mentioned in my intro, neither party, the Democrats are having their convention as we speak, and neither party has adopted in their platform, officially adopted in their platform, the issue of mass incarceration or the drug war. That's very disheartening because this is something that impacts communities adversely and dramatically.
Well, I think instead of looking to political leaders, we're going to have to look to the clergy, look to the public leaders outside of elective office to lead the charge to educate our public to what is really in their best interest again. I mean, politicians are that. They, no matter what party or what label they carry, they're more concerned about election and re-election than they are about the right public policies to to safeguard our society.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying we can't look to the politicians and sometimes...
Not alone, but I think, again, if enough people who educate themselves about the problem and how to deal with it properly would put pressure on the Congress and on the White House and others, perhaps we'll see some change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think hopefully with younger politicians coming aboard who are hopefully more concerned with the public than they are with their own personal gain, again, with the right leadership, we'll see a change here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Hope and change. We've heard that before, right?
Oh, yeah, right. Working to see if we can't accomplish that. And it isn't going to be up to people in Washington or Sacramento, but it's going to be up to all of us in the various communities to come together. There are organizations that are out there now. The Sentencing Project, for example, that's office in Washington, D.C., that works hard to try to inform the public about the mandatory minimums and their impact on the whole sentencing scheme in the federal courts, as well as some of those in the state courts and all. I mean, there are other organizations that work towards educating the public. Mm-hmm. And until we get the public better educated and to understand just what they're faced with and how they might accomplish some change and at far less cost. And then, of course, we'll get the politicians aboard. Because, there's an old saying of the French politician who heard the crowd outside, and he said, well, wait a minute, I've got to go out there and see which way the crowd's going so I can lead them. Mm-hmm. And in the same way, politicians often have to be led, but they need to be led by an educated public that knows what it's in its own best interest.
Yeah, and that, and I mentioned Deval Patrick, the governor of Massachusetts.
Right, I know him well. He used to be a law clerk here with one of our judges. He used to come down to Chambers and chat with me a good bit before he went back. First he went to Coca-Cola as their general counsel, then left that and went back home to Massachusetts, and it seems like he's a terrific governor.
And he says it takes we, the American people,
That's right.
to shape our future. And I think, we do have politicians who mention that. Even President Obama said...
But they have to do more than mention it. They really have to work towards that. And
they have to do more than mention it.
Of course, too many of our congresspeople, particularly in the House of Representatives, where they're up for election and re-election every 2 years, more concerned with getting elected and re-elected than they are in trying to do what's best for the citizenry at large.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, our prison population has actually, in less than 30 years, exploded from 300,000
I know.
Over 2.2 million. It's probably grown.
That's right. It's closer to 3 million now.
Oh, my gosh. See, my stats are actually old. I get my stats from Michelle's book. So
right.
It's close to 3 million now.
That's right.
Isn't this ridiculous?
And it's not an answer to the problems that we have.
It's not the answer.
But it adds to the problem, though.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, like, if someone is in prison and then they get out and they end up going back in, the recidivism rate is very high. But
of course, you expect it to be. I think any time you keep a person from going back, that's a success. And instead, we look at all of those who go back, and it's no real, doubt in anyone's mind that most of these people are going to go back because they come out uneducated, unequipped to do anything. Many of them can't fit in to any kind of a system. They're not even eligible for welfare in a lot of places, food stamps, other kinds of things. Their families suffer. They can't vote in a lot of states. Mm-hmm. And we do everything possible to make sure that they go back.
Mm-hmm. And as Michelle said, it's a new it's a racial caste system. That's why she calls it the new Jim Crow. It's just been redesigned.
That's right.
You're there once you're a felon. Once you've been branded a felon, you're out of the legal economy.
That's right. I hate to see anybody come into our system because you don't come out any the better for it. Even when I was a state court judge over 33 years ago in Los Angeles County, I had over 16 murders the last year I was there with kids. I had over 12 murders with kids 16 and under and all. And you just know that there could be that many more, because here you have kids who have no sense of self-worth. I mean, they haven't been brought up and nurtured properly, and they care nothing about their own lives, so you know they're not going to care about your life or my life or anyone else's. It's a horrible kind of situation, and we as a society have to do something about it collectively, and we can't depend upon elected officials to do it.
And, you know, that prison population exploded while you were on that, actually on the bench.
Oh, yes,
you
that's
saw
right.
the explosion.
Right. Right.
I mean, so what were you thinking the whole time?
Well, frustrated the whole time, because we started the so-called sentencing guidelines during that period. I've fought against it. Was one of about 10 judges who was called back to Washington to review them before they were actually put into place, but found out that they were just using us as cannon fodder. And I tried to get them at the very least to change the name from sentencing guidelines to, sentencing factors that we have to follow, because, they were compulsory. They were taking away the discretion that sitting judges, federal judges such as myself, who have a lifetime appointment appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the United States Senate, in giving that discretion to young prosecutors. And I used to be a young prosecutor 30, 40, 50 years ago, and I think I know more now than I knew then. And I'm not trying to build a reputation to try to go to a higher office or anything else, but many of these young prosecutors would use the sentencing guidelines and use these cases to build on the backs of these young defendants their own careers. So, yes, I've been here and I've been frustrated with it. We now have some Supreme Court cases that have given us back some of the discretion that we used to have, but we still don't have it all. And to this day, I don't discount the fact that guidelines properly used can be helpful. After some 35 years or more of judging, I still find that sentencing is the toughest thing that I have to do, that I have to face, and I do it weekly. And let me tell you, talking about this so-called war on drugs, as I indicated, I had the world's largest seizure of cocaine. I gave several of the defendants, after they were convicted, life without the possibility of parole. I had to go above the guidelines in order to do it. The Ninth Circuit, which is the Court of Appeals, which is the court between my trial court and the United States Supreme Court, reversed me because they said that even though there was this horrendous amount of drugs, that the guidelines didn't calculate for that, and that was too stiff a sentence to give. And yet, almost every Monday, I was meting out life without the possibility of parole. The young black and brown defendants who had a couple strikes on the state side and then had enough crack to fit on the thumbnail, and nobody batted an eye about that. But when I got the case back, I gave them life without the possibility of parole again. And this time, it stuck. I had talked with Senator Sam Nunn, who had been in the United States Senate at that time, and he was just pushed out of shape when I told him about being reversed in this, and he was about to hold hearings and all, but then the case was affirmed the second time around. But what an awful message to go out, to have the largest amount of cocaine. There were tunnels built under the border from Juarez into the United States, and then they would put it in these big rig trucks and have Mexican artifacts in 90% of the truck and hidden compartments in the rest, and bring it into Silmar here in Los Angeles, and then distribute it around the country. I mean, they had so many kilos of this stuff that you had to take it to San Jose to find an incinerary big enough to burn it. And then we kept a number of so-called keys, the kilos, for the trial. And they had names such as Reagan, Carter, Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola. Each one of these names indicating a certain purity and all. And to have any kind of concern about the sentence being too large for the people who were running that kind of a distribution ring, and not bat an eye about the 18, 19, 20-year-old kid who's using crack cocaine or some other drug. I mean, it just blows your mind.
I mean, that's clearly, you see the disparate impact on different communities because...
Well, you do.
Exactly.
There's no doubt about it.
You see that right there.
Well, when we had the schoolyard cases, we had about 12 or 14 defendants, all of them being charged. Every one of them was black or brown. I mean, when you look at the sentencing guidelines again and these mandatory minimums, you can get around the mandatory minimum by providing substantial assistance to the government. But as I looked at it, the people who were supplying the substantial assistance were hardly ever, if ever, black or brown. And when I went public about it, then they started bringing in a few people and giving them what they called a telephone count. If you would, use the telephone to arrange the drug deal, and most of drug deals are arranged that way, and so almost anybody could be the recipient of that. But it wasn't until I really went public about the fact that there were hardly any blacks ever being given this, that they then finally started giving a few. So it's awful, and the sentencing guidelines themselves are driven by the mandatory minimums, and that is one of the real horrors in this whole tale.
Well, where did you say the prosecutors institute the sentencing guidelines? Do they create...
Sentencing Commission puts them out,
and
but
who's
prosecution decides what the sentence is going to be by the way they would charge the crime. As I said, with a drug case where you have multiple defendants, one defendant might be given a telephone count, so he could go below the mandatory minimum. And a lot of that would depend upon who was representing him. If he had someone who was a former prosecutor who was now a defense lawyer, who knew people in the prosecutorial office, he could go in that office and sit down and talk with them and get a pretty good deal. But nobody would know about it. Our probation department wouldn't know the details. I, doing the sentencing, wouldn't know it. But yet, one reason supposedly for the sentencing guidelines to begin with was to have more clarity in sentencing. And we had far less of it. And I know that your listeners would be surprised to know that the two legislators who were behind the sentencing guidelines were a very strange set of political bedfellows. They were Strom Thurmond and Ted Kennedy. And don't need to tell you why each one was doing what he was doing. I think one really was concerned about disparate sentencing for people with the same kinds of charges, and the other one was more concerned perhaps with white-collar people getting too much time.
And you're saying Ted Kennedy was concerned with what? What was his motivation?
Senator Kennedy?
Yeah, Senator
I think Senator Kennedy was concerned, for example, when you had a couple of bank robbers, and one would get the statutory maximum of 20 years, and another one might just get 8 years or 4 years, depending upon. But it seems to me if Congress were really concerned about judges sentencing, certainly within the statutory limits, but so differently, they could narrow the limits. They could say bank robbery carries 4 to 10 years, or if it's armed bank robbery, instead of 25 years, it could be 10 to 25. They had all kinds of things that they could have done otherwise.
So do you think it would be apt to characterize our criminal justice system as broken?
Oh, I think it is, definitely. It definitely is. And again, it's at every level. It's not just at the federal level by any means. It's at every level. And I say that because we go through these periods from time to time where because of the cost, as we're about to be seeing that happen again, we go to what's called indeterminate sentencing, and the judges have more discretion. And then when a politician sees that he or she has an opportunity to show the public that he or she is being tough on crime, we go back to determinative sentencing, and we have things like the mandatory minimums and sentencing guidelines. So it goes in cycles, but this has been the longest cycle like this that I've ever seen. And I've been a prosecutor, and I've been a public defender. So
but, if our criminal justice system is broken, our system is broken.
Well, that's the thing.
Our democracy is
our
broken.
System, and more than just the criminal justice system. Criminal justice system, takes all of the lickings for what are the problems in society. Many things that don't and shouldn't even come into the criminal justice system.
Our society is broken, and yet it just keeps on ticking. Like that ever-ready battery or something.
It does, but as I say, hopefully with new leadership and with a better educated society, we'll move away from these kinds of things. And sadly, because of the costs alone, I think we're going to get people who have been trumpeting these draconian sentences saying, well, we tried this, or the other side that has tried this, and now let's do something that costs a lot less, and it's going to give us greater dividends. Well,
it's like you've been part of the system. You are the system. You've worked the system.
I'm part of it, yes.
Yeah, even though you were holding your nose, with some of it, right? You were holding your nose.
Oh, yeah, but it's still trying to sentence properly as best I could under the confines that we have, because I've taken an oath to follow the law, and I try to do that. But at the same time, I want to balance, the needs of society and the protection of society, and at the same time, if it's possible, to try to bring about some rehabilitation for the person or persons who appear before me. And of course, if that happens, then that benefits society as well.
But you see, our communities are not getting safer by
I know.
by taking off low-level drug users.
Exactly.
Off the streets, out of the communities. That's not making safer communities.
Not at all.
Yeah. So it's broken. It's not working effectively. You say with new leadership. I don't know if we're going in the right direction, because we've just had 4 years of President Barack Obama. Definitely Mitt Romney wouldn't be going in the right direction. And I know that President Obama has been...
I certainly don't want to say anything about the politics of it all, because as I've said, I've seen people on both sides of the aisle who have given us poor leadership. Right.
And I know that President Obama has increased funding for the Edward J. Byrne program, which is a program that is increasing not drug treatment, but drug enforcement.
Well, I think we need more money for drug treatment. We really do, and it's far more cost-effective, and the results are far better for society in general.
So that's your prescription, is that we're going to hope and change, that that we get new leadership.
Education, and it's accepting the fait accompli that people are going to wake up and see that it costs them far too much.
It costs them far too much. Well, I did see a report on NBC about how the prison industrial complex actually, building new prisons actually brings jobs into these communities. So it's revitalizing communities that have gone stale, so to speak.
Well, that's
you build
right.
a prison in a small community, you know that the citizens in that community will be employed with the prison.
Right.
So I think, I'm not as optimistic. I think we're going the opposite way, you see.
Well, so far, but I have hope, and as I say, a lot of it comes out of the reality that once the public understands that it costs them too much, they're just not going to stand for it any longer.
And that's something that my show attempts to do, is to raise awareness.
That's right.
Inform people.
Education, awareness.
Yeah, and I actually have a petition going on right now, a petition to end the drug war. It's not taking off like gangbusters. Like, some of these petitions, you get hundreds of thousands of people signing it. I'm just like at maybe 2,500. I'd love for it to take... Huh?
It's a good start.
It's a good start to start with 25. And this petition is addressed to Attorney General Eric Holder. I just want to get his attention. And as you said, there are a lot of people. There's also the Drug Policy Alliance. A lot of people trying to raise awareness about this issue.
That's right.
So we're going to raise awareness. What else can we do?
Well, other than that, just make your voices heard, and I think by doing things in the media, such as you're doing, getting what's left of the print media involved in it, to question the kinds of things that go on in the courts. Come to the courts, find out, invite individuals to come and see for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Because even, this, I think it was Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois
yeah.
that spearheaded the effort to get the mandatory minimum sentencing ratio at 18-1 as opposed to for crack cocaine.
That's right.
So that's still.
But it's a start. It's better than 100-1.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as I say, it shouldn't be there at all, and things just don't happen overnight. Hopefully, it won't be like with all deliberate speed, but it does take some time.
But I think of all the lives lost, all the families destroyed.
Yes. It's tragic.
It's very tragic. It's very tragic. Well, Judge Hatter, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on my show today,
Sure.
and I'd like to invite you to come on at another time. As I said, this is an issue that I've been focused on for quite a while now.
Well, I'm delighted that you are, and as I say, there are others who are too, and hopefully with a collective voice, there can be change.
Okay, and at some point I want to talk to you again about my petition. Maybe you can give me some pointers as to where I can send it so I can get some more signatures. Are you open to talking to me about that off air?
No, I can't do that. That really, even though it's nonpartisan, it's still a political act, and I'm sure that if you were to talk to people at the Sentencing Project
right.
in Washington, I can give you their phone number, 202-628.
I'm going to talk to you off air about it. I can talk to another agency you're suggesting that can help me get more signatures for me. Because as a judge emeritus, you cannot get involved in political issues.
That's right.
It gives the appearance of impropriety.
Well, that's right. I'm still hearing cases, still sentencing people.
Well, how were you able to discuss this with me then?
Hmm?
How were you able to discuss the drug war? Does it not, mass incarceration? How can you discuss?
Well, I haven't given up my First Amendment rights.
About a minute and a half.
I say from the bench what I say to you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I admire your energy and your passion about this issue, and it's been an honor to be able to take the time to speak with you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Judge Hatter.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, we're just speaking with Judge Hatter. Everyone knows that I have had the mass incarceration petition, the petition to end the drug war, currently circulating. We've got about, 2,500 signatures. I'd like to get a ton more. So please go to the change.org website and put in the keywords drug war, in the drug war, and that should bring up the petition. Also, you can go on to my Twitter page, which my handle is my last name first, Wells Kathleen, and frequently I tweet that petition. So please, 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 I've been talking about the drug war quite a bit lately. Next week I'm going to talk about something different. I haven't decided yet. I may have author Tim Weiss on the show, but please go to the change.org site, put in the keywords in the drug war, and sign that petition, because we want to raise awareness for the American people. We want the American people to know what's going on in America. We've got what's going on with our criminal justice system. So, and we know that, as I said earlier, neither party has in their official platform even mentioned this issue of mass incarceration, even mentioned this issue of the drug war. They don't mention it. So it's us, the American people, that need to bring awareness to this issue to change the issue. So I want to thank my listeners. I'll be back again next week at 2 o'clock, and I'd like you to join me. So this is the Kathleen Wells Show. I'm Kathleen, and I say thank you very much.